In this video, we're talking about relationships, specifically relationships between angles. Before we get started, we just have two terms that you guys need to be familiar with. The first is adjacent angles. And adjacent angles is really just a fancy way to say angles that are next to each other. Adjacent angles are next to each other. That means they have the same vertex and they also share a side. So in this diagram, I've got this angle in red, and then I've got this angle in blue. Those two share a side, have the same vertex O, and they are adjacent. They're next to each other. So I'll name those angle AOC and angle COD. The next term is opposite rays. And opposite rays are just two collinear rays, rays that are on the same line, that have the same endpoint and extend in opposite directions. So basically it's two rays that start at the same point, go in opposite directions, and that means they actually form a line. So in this diagram here, there's a couple pairs of opposite rays that I can name, but let's talk about the ones that start at point B. This red one is one ray, and this blue one is another ray. Those are two opposite rays. And so I've got ray BA in the red and ray BC in the blue. The first special relationship we have is called vertical angles. And vertical angles are just two opposite angles that are created by intersecting lines. So if you see in this picture here, by opposite, we just mean across from each other. So this yellow angle and this blue angle, those are vertical angles. They're opposite from each other, created by intersecting lines. And this red angle and this green angle, those are also vertical angles. Now, if you notice, the yellow and the blue angle have the same measure. They're both about 128 degrees. And then the other pair, the red and the green, are also the same measure. And so this is going to be true always. Vertical angles are always congruent. Vertical angles always have the same measure. The next pair of angles is called a linear pair. And that's just two adjacent angles, angles that are next to each other, whose sum is 180 degrees. And so looking at this diagram, we see this red angle and this blue angle. They are next to each other, adjacent, and they form a straight line. So they add up to 180 degrees. A linear pair forms a straight line. So for example, let's say this red angle is 120 degrees. And we want to find the blue angle. Well, we know that little plus little equals big, so the 120 plus whatever the blue angle is will equal 180 degrees. So all we have to do is subtract. Take the big angle, subtract one of the small angles, and that will give us, in this case, 60 degrees, which tells us the small angle is 60 degrees. Okay, here's an example for practice. We just need to write the related equation. And we have an equation for the red angle here and this blue angle here. Now, what do I know about them? They are opposite from each other when we had two intersecting lines, which means they are vertical angles. And we know that vertical angles are congruent, so we can set their measures equal to each other. That tells us that 2x plus 5 equals 4x plus 1. If I were to go ahead and solve that equation, I would end up with x equals 2. And then I could substitute that into either one of the angle equations I'm given. So I substituted it into 2x plus 5. And once I do that, I end up with that equaling 9 degrees. So that tells me actually that each of these angles are 9 degrees in this case. So in this next example, I can see that these two angles next to each other create this straight line down here. And what that means is that this is a linear pair. Now, that tells me that when I add the two angles together, it equals 180 degrees. So if I'm setting up this equation, all I need to do is say, well, my first angle plus my second angle, adding those together gives me 180 degrees. And that is the equation that we would solve. So there's two more pairs of angles for today. Complementary angles are two angles that add up to 90 degrees. So they form a right angle. And we can see on this diagram here that right angle symbol in the corner. So that tells us that angle 1 and angle 2 are complementary, and we call them the complement of each other. So angle 1 is the complement of angle 2, and angle 2 is the complement of angle 1. One way to help remember this is you can think complementary equals a corner. Both start with C, and a corner, which is 90 degrees, that reminds us that those are complementary. Complementary, 90 degrees, a corner. Now, one more thing related to this. BA and BC form a right angle. So I'm going to write ray BA and ray BC. They are perpendicular, and we use this symbol right here. That means perpendicular, which just means forms a right angle. And the symbol we use for that is those lines right there. BA is perpendicular to BC. And the last pair of angles for today are supplementary angles. These are two angles that add up to 180 degrees. So think kind of like a linear pair. In this diagram, you can see they form that straight line, that 180 degrees. So we would say angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. They add up to 180 degrees. And angle 1 is the supplement of angle 2. Angle 2 is the supplement of angle 1. A way you can help to remember this is supplementary equals straight line. Both start with an S. A straight line is 180 degrees. Supplementary angles form a straight line. Two final examples for today. In part A, angle A and angle B are complementary. Remember, that means they equal 90 degrees when they are added together. If the measure of angle A is 14x and the measure of angle B is 6x minus 10, all I have to do is add those two together, and I know they will equal 90 degrees. So if I'm going to write the equation, I can write 14x, that's angle A, plus 6x minus 10, that's angle B, and that is going to add to equal 90 degrees. For part B, this is very similar, but instead of adding to 90, we know that angles C and D are supplementary, which tells us they add up to 180 degrees. This is just like what we did for linear pairs. The measure of angle C is x plus 10, and the measure of angle D is 2x. So if I add x plus 10 and 2x together, I can make them equal to 180 degrees, because C plus D will give us 180 degrees, because those angles are supplementary.